and my PhD is about developing ecological design tools for designing more ecologically. The whole PhD work basically has different parts that all come together. I will only present a small aspect of my PhD work to you. This is the second part of my whole PhD. I basically have three main points. The first is about creating new design principles for designing more ecologically. Then about mapping ecosystem benefits, what I'm going to present you today. And all that is going to come together to basically creating a design tool that should help designers and architects to create to design more ecologically with a lot of scientific knowledge behind it. So when I look at mapping more ecologically, I'm looking at ecosystems, but from a landscape perspective. So the first problem was to map our landscapes with classic surfaces and get a good foundation of groupings in order to map them on their interior, basically. For that, I use the green infrastructure typologies. Some of you might already know them. You can find them in a lot of scientific research now. They are widely accepted. This is an image of those typologies. So you can see they are from IM1 up to AQ1. So we have some aquatic typologies, the impervious, which we more find in cities and urban areas, mixed surfaces and pervious surfaces. So that gives you an idea how we map the proper landscape in different types.
Delia, sorry to interrupt. I think your PowerPoint is not moving. Maybe you need to go to presentation mode. We're still seeing the first slide. Yeah, now we're seeing the second slide.
I might have to go like that. Okay, so this is the second slide now, sorry. So these are the green infrastructure typologies. You can see they mapped to different groups for different ground types, and then you have no vegetation to high vegetation, from trees, shrubs, and grasses. They all grouped in different typologies, and under the image you can even see how they build up. I'm going to show you another picture so that you get an idea of how the typologies come together. So in this table you see the typology classes with their description and with their different surface fractions. So you see how many trees, shrubs they have. So you can easily group every landscape in those typologies. For my PhD, I focused on Europe, especially on urban forests, but I tried this mapping in different cities to see how good it's working. I'm going to give you an example of how it looks when we use this classic mapping of just green infrastructure typologies. So this is how it would look. You can use it in different scales. So in the top one, it's quite big, and you can easily see where we have dense vegetation, where we have cities, where we have lakes. It's classically coded from green to gray, so it's easily understood and just tells us basically where we have a lot of green and not that much. For my mapping, it was essential to connect the amount of green to ecosystem services, because I don't want to map just the structure of where we have green typologies or where we have green features. I want to map ecosystem services, so to show how are the ecosystems functioning and how many services they are providing for us. So I had to combine those typologies with ecosystem functions and their performance. And in order to do so, I looked at the ecosystem services at different groupings. The classic ecosystem services I looked at were cultural, regulating, supporting and provisioning ecosystem services. The classic ecosystem services are just mentioned underneath. You probably should know all of them. Quite importantly to recognize is that the regulating and provisioning services are more than the cultural services in numbers. So to give my mapping a correct value, I decided to actually give the regulating and provisioning services higher value because the cultural and supporting services are building up on those regulating and provisioning services. What I concretely mean by that, I will show you in my matrix, but I'll show you how I build up my foundation of knowledge, basically. So I looked at all ecosystem services in regard to these green infrastructure typologies. There's already a lot of knowledge out there, which I use to build this big foundation on building up my mapping. So in this table, you see only some of my sources I used. It's just a short example. The actual table of sources I used with their relation to ecosystem services and their geographical scale is about 10 pages. So this is just a shortcut giving you an idea of what the sources behind this and resources underlying this methodology look like. So every theory I looked at was specifically for an area, for Europe or even a small country, some even for just small regions with specific temperatures. I tried to find mainly resources that were connected to Europe or Germany or UK. Well, it wasn't that easy because some of the ecosystem services are not that good mapped yet in our current resources. So I tried to use for each ecosystem service at least 3 to 5 resources. And they all had to be connected to this green infrastructure typology to get the same foundation and not being related to different typologies or mappings. And you can see in that table that they all basically relate to one ecosystem services, sometimes two. So I had to find a good foundation for each ecosystem services and building it up. These sources help me create kind of an ecological weighting for each service within each typology. So that I could say for water purity, the amount of trees is really good. It depends on the water quality, so I could start getting a ranking within the typologies for each ecosystem service. For that, I'm going to show you my so-called matrix. I just have to share my screen again. The matrix is quite big. I'm going to show you now. So I hope you can see my figure now. I did it in Excel. So at the top you can see my basic green infrastructure typologies, which I showed you before. So this is a classic ranking from gray to green and then blue. At the left you can see all the ecosystem services I referred to, the classic ecosystem services. And now you can see in each row, if we pick up, for example, pollination, in this one, you can see each has a number for each typology, for just the service pollination, and that gives us a ranking. So as higher the number, as higher its ecological value for that service. It's 1 to 34 because we have 34 different green infrastructure typologies. So you can see the highest for pollination in here is PV1, which is basically a mixed grassland. When we look at which landscape is not highly performing in pollination, we can look at, for example, number 2, which is IM5, so quite urban with some grasses and some trees. So it gives you an idea of how I came up with this mapping and how I was able to evaluate the ecological functioning and provisioning of these services within a map of typologies. So you can see here it's grouped in different services. If I scroll down now, it's a lot of numbers, don't get confused. We have a sum for all the services and how many points they could get. So if a service or a typology is performing in one service particularly good, the best would be to have 34 points in each service. So the highest points it could get was 918. So this is its ranking. And you can see how it already changed its colors. So that's the classic color code I created now from red, basically saying this landscape is performing really poorly to performing really good is highly green. So normally we would expect to say that in urban areas it's quite red and pure forest is really green. That's what most people would expect. And actual fact is that we have a lot of cultural services in urban areas and we have a lot of mixed vegetations that perform not as well as forests maybe, but have a quite good mix of services. So this is why in the middle we have some orange but some green as well. So the ranking changed. So the best performing landscape in this case is the pure forest. So this is PV11. This is the untouched, unmanaged forest, what we don't have a lot anymore. So this shows me that is 34 is still the highest landscapes. So this green infrastructure typology is kind of functioning as my referential point. But in the middle, it's slightly different. If we go down here, we also have the ranking for each service category to give an idea. Also, they map out again to see if there's a different ranking. If we say supporting, provisioning and regulating services have the same ranking as cultural services, the ranking slightly changes, but not immensely. So this one is the ranking which we have if provisioning and regulating services have the normal weight, depending on their ecosystem services amount. And this one is if all categories, all 4 ecosystem categories have the same amount. You see there's some smaller changes. So this landscape is in ranking 14, it changed to 12. This is 19, it changed to 18, but it's not a big difference. I'm going to show you now how this matrix is going to look on a map to give you an idea what these numbers are looking in and what they can show us and tell us if we use them actually on a map. So let me change my screen again to the presentation. So back on the presentation. So this is a classic mapping. The baseline of this map is in my hometown Aachen. It's a German city. At the top is more the urban area, and to the bottom we are changing more in the rural area. So you see in the classic mapping with green infrastructure typologies that we have a mix of gray areas and green areas. That's the classic mapping we have already. Now we're going to change to the one with the ecosystem services. So with the new color code I use, so the PVs and the numbers of the landscape, they do not change. It's the same landscape. It's looking like this. So this map tells us what landscapes and what patches are performing really poorly in ecosystem services and areas which probably should be enhanced in the future. So landscapes that need to be redesigned, that need to be more ecologically, or where we could even integrate it in urban forests. So this map gives a lot of information on what areas need a lot of attention in the future. So you see the gray areas are mainly red and orange, but even the pure forest areas are just light green, changing to orange. We have some aquatics here. So it shows us how the landscape is performing. And it gives us not just one service, it shows us how good the services are, but also how high the variation of ecosystem services are. So in the city, we might have some good services, 1 or 2 or 3, but they might be performing really highly, but the amount of different ecosystem services really poorly. That's why the urban landscape types are mainly red and orange. So when we have a new design project, this could even tell us where the design should go. So if we see this is urban area with just residential areas. So in this area, we could say we need some more green areas with highly ecosystem services. So maybe we need a green park in this area. In the top here, you can see already some green pockets coming through. So here is already a lot better, but we could say in between those green pockets, it could be potentially another ecosystem highly performing landscape. So this tells a lot about where we have highly ecosystem services and their functions. It gives us a lot of information already. But I even went a step further and analyzed my matrix in different ways. So I looked at the ecosystem services. They all up on this side. Those are the ecosystem services, all shortcuts. So CS for cultural services, RS for regulating services, SS for supporting services, and PS for provisioning services. So I analyzed it, and it gave me this family tree basically, and it showed how much each ecosystem service category is, how much it's relating to others, and how much they correlate. And you see that some provisioning services are really close to cultural services, and if I want to go from those provisioning services to maybe those regulating services, it's quite far back because I have to go all the way back here to go this way. So they're quite different, while those two are really close to each other. So it gives us an idea how the ecosystem services work in between when we look at the whole ecosystem in one and not just one service. Because in all the theories I looked at, it was always one service in particular, maybe 2. But in my work now, we look at all the ecosystem services in a system approach, take them all together, analyze them and say, how are they performing? The same we have here for the landscapes. So the typologies. So you see the PV11, the pure forest, is really close to PV6, PV9 in their pure performance. It's not how the landscape type looks, it's just their pure performance. So they're quite close, while here we have the aquatic 1, 2, and 3 are close together because they have similar services. And you see totally different cluster on this side because they separated at this point here. Those are the in previous services 1, 2, 3. We have 4 and 6 here, some mixed surfaces. So they are quite poorly presented. So those that don't have a lot of services. So if we look up here in this area up here, this is what most cities look like. In most cities we have the typologies in previous 1 to 5 and mixed surfaces 1, 2, 3. Oh, it stopped. So in this area, this is the landscapes we have in the city. This block should be highly green because it's performing really good, but it's in the blue, it's really low. So it should be green, yellow, or the best would be even red. But this area is quite blue. So it means these services all are really badly performing in all those top services. There's a good mix in those bottom ones. Those are some cultural services ones, some provisioning, but mostly cultural. So it means that our cities basically look like this at the moment. They're not highly performing, and they should. If we look at the forests, say PV10, PV11, PV9, those are the highly performing forest types, it's looking very different. We have a lot of highly red, some blue, not a lot red, and not a lot of blue only in some cultural service. So it shows us that our cities need to change in their ecological functioning, and that the forests are performing really high. So it gives us the opportunity to bring the forests closer into the towns and bringing those services and functions with them into our cities. I'm going to show you 2 other maps I did. I'm not going into too much detail with this one because it's quite complicated. So this is another analysis of my matrix. So just to give you an idea of how much information we can get from it and how much it could help in the future to design more ecologically, especially in urban areas. So the points you see are the typologies again. Are you still seeing my screen? I think so. So these are the typologies. The green arrows basically are the services, and in the area they are pointing. So in this one, when we just look at supporting services, the one it's pointing at, those typologies are really highly performing in this one because it's pointing in that direction. So if we say provisioning services, regulating, so a lot are going in the right direction. So these landscape types are performing highly. Why IM 1, 2, and 3, the city ones, they are not performing really good in those, but are a combination of those cultural services. And in this one, you can see that it starts to build clusters. So we have a group up here, one group here, one group here, and it shows us how they are relating to each other. So it's going back to the image from before, and it also shows how they correlate in between. So some have positive correlations. So for example, if we enhance one service in one typology, so we enhance one typology in PV10, a lot of services will improve as well, going in this because they're going in the same direction. But that also can mean that if we improve one on this side, we have maybe a negative correlation with cultural services. So it shows us the correlations and relationships in between typologies as services. I hope it does not confuse you too much. I know it's a lot to take up in such a short time. So that's it, basically. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I can go back to the presentation, to different slides if you want to. It's just a shortcut of my presentation and of my PhD work. It consists of a lot, so just feel free to ask.